operation. So I was just going to ask you, in terms of where you do this possum control, do you see a big impact on the forest?
Think about New Zealand native bush before the Maori came.
Yeah.
The grazing on our protocarp must have been incredible. There must have been millions and millions of birds grazing on our berries and our shoots on our trees. You know, on the farm I had, outside my kitchen window, I had some cows, you know, and the pigeons used to come in and strip them bare. So there's nothing left on them, you know, and there was only 2 or 3 pigeons did that. And, you know, it's not long ago that a good Maori mate of mine was telling me that the old Maori over in out of Turangi, they said that the pigeons used to eat the miro berries on the western side of Lake Taupo, and up in the southeastern side, up and behind there, was a bit higher, so the berries were a bit later. And they reckon that when the pigeons went from over there to there, it was like clouds that block out the sun. There was literally hundreds of thousands of them would migrate from this lot of berries to this lot of berries. And that's not that long ago. That's a long time after Maori and European have been here. But so before that, the grazing on our you know, I've sat under big rata trees and watched sticks dropping down and thinking, what the hell? And you see, this is down in Fiordland where the bird life is incredible. And you see all these carcass up there ripping off all the stuff and dropping them on the ground, you know. So when there was huge amounts of carcass, keas, pigeons, there must have been incredible amounts of grazing on our protocarp trees. So this brings me to a theory that could be totally wrong, but after a lot of these big 1080 drops, you are basically killing everything, or a high majority of the grazing things in there, and there's nothing being grazed. Now, if you drive around from here to Turangi and you go around the back of the Lake Road Ira and Pihanga, which has been 1080'd over 30 times in the last 40 years, or in the last 50 years, there's great patches of dead bush there. And everybody thinks it's possum. There are possums there because they get run over on the road, but not that many. And I believe that bush is dying because of lack of grazing.
No, yeah. Yeah, right.
And that's a theory that I've been looking at for a few years now. So, look, when I first started possuming, well, as a kid going out with your father, spotlighting at night, and there was huge, well, he used to do poison lines with not very far in the workings up there and get 700 possums, and they only skinned the very best of them, you know. But there was still incredible bird life there then. Lots of pigeons, lots of carcass, lots of everything. So the possums and the bird life were surviving side by side. Now, when DOC was formed, they said to me, you are doing a commercial operation on our land. You have to pay us to get a possum permit, right? They hadn't realised then, which is only 25, 30 years ago, that the possum was a major problem. They thought because I was catching them on their land, I was making money, so I had to pay them $150 for a permit for a month, right? It didn't take Doc long to think, oh, we need to get money, you know, and all of a sudden possums became this massive problem throughout New Zealand. And I've seen, you know, all this country was because it didn't have the commercial hunters like the South Island or the Uluru where there was deer, it had no deer here, and it only had small grey possums. The possum, and it was a wet climate, the possum numbers were really high, extremely high. But the bird life was still pretty good, you know. And I see, like places where I hunted Mangapura after the 1080 drops, I've walked a lot of waterways and I've seen a lot of dead possums in these little waterways. They're going to get water before they die. You've got all the eels and kura cleaning up those things. Now, all these activists have said, oh, you know, they're eating pellets in the water and dying. They've proven time after time that the water dilutes those pellets, so it doesn't. But nobody's done real serious work on these freshwater fish eating the carcasses that are in the water and the secondary poisoning side of it. Nobody's done real work on that. And
yeah, it's interesting. I was just reading a article from about 15 years ago of someone who had done some specific studies of that, and they couldn't get Doc to listen to them, they reckoned.
Yep. Well, see, I told you about the girl that was, they take the kiwis' eggs from down here, hatch them, bring them up, and then they're releasing them on this backside of the mountain where they've done all this predator work to make it into an inland island. And she told me that they would 30% of them were killing themselves going down into the creek to get kura, and when the creek's in flood they still go there and get washed away. And I thought about this and I said to her, have you ever tested any of those birds? She said, what for? I said, to see whether they were poisoned. She goes, oh, you're over the top, you're ridiculous. Now, I can't believe that if I was picking up these dead birds that they've spent some ungodly amount of money to raise from a chick, that I wouldn't have tested to see if it had secondary poisoning in it from eating kura in the creek.
Yeah.
That was my thinking. But no, she says I'm an over-the-top radical. And I probably have got a bit. But at times, earlier on, I said, you know, 1080 is a great thing. It's got some bad side effects, but it is the tool to get rid of possums in New Zealand. But 20 years later, I'm still thinking, well, possum numbers just keep coming back.
Yeah.
And environmentally, it's not the best thing we could, it's environmentally, I believe it's going to be a huge impact because we've been using it too long and we will keep using it too long. And, but I haven't got an answer to replace it. I can trap out some areas, but there's very few experienced trappers. Like they say, they buy 90% of the product off 10% of the trappers. So these trappers are all getting around my age and getting over it. And there's no young guys coming through with the drive or the knowledge that I was lucky enough to pick up when I first started off older guys. So I don't know the answers. I don't know. It's not good what I see as far as possums and predator work in New Zealand.
Then I just thought I'd ask you about the bird monitors and predator monitors, because I did quite a bit of statistical work looking at how they measure the impact on birds.
Yeah.
I was mostly doing 5-minute bird counts.
Yeah.
So you have an area, you have maybe a trapping program, and you do 5-minute bird counts over, well, you can do it for like 10 years maybe, but you have to do it for several years.
Yeah.
And you've got multiple species of birds which come and go naturally.
Yeah, which they do.
And so the difficulty of it's actually very difficult to
Yep.
pick up
Yep.
changes, much
Yep.
harder than they think. And,
Oh, look, that's what I believe. Like, when you're in the bush every day for, you know, a long period of time, like I have in my life, but you're trying to produce, so you haven't got time to sit and count birds, but you get a pretty good awareness of what the bird life's like where you're working, because most of them make a noise, you know, or you see the fantails, or you see the pigeons, or, you know, you get a pretty good awareness of it. This country that I've worked here used to be full of bush robins, the little black robin. They were everywhere, and even after they cut a lot of the native and planted pine, the robins survived. But I've noticed over the last 2 years the robins have gone. I haven't seen one. Where they always come around where you were running, because you scruffed up the ground and there was insects that they could get. In the last 2 years, within the last 5 years, the predator trapping operations in here have exploded. They got huge ones. So they haven't at all helped the robin.
yeah.
The robin is gone.
Well, that's a very specific.
Yep. And that stands out to me.
So I wonder what would cause that.
Maybe there was these scientists here 7 or 8 years ago with nets up trying to catch the robins to remove them to Wellington Way because some virus had wiped them out there, they reckon.
Oh, really?
And whether they brought the virus in that's killed these robins, but I'm really noticed in the last 2 years the robins have completely gone. I haven't seen one where they were everywhere.
That's a bit sad.
Yeah, it is sad. So the predator trapping work that has exploded and become huge has not helped the robins, I can tell you that. And that's quite sad to me, yeah, because I like the little,
they're cute.
they're neat little birds, and they've gone. And it always amazed me how they survived after they cut so much bush, and they survived in the pine trees. They did survive quite well, but
Yes, well, you'd have to think there is a specific reason why the robins would disappear.
yeah, there's got to be a specific reason why the robins have disappeared. That's a really tricky one too, because like I said, I've worked a lot of areas over the 50 years where there was a lot of possum numbers, but there was really still good bird life.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I don't, well, for example, this valley where I sit in the Mangapurua, and they haven't poisoned it all in the Whakapapa Valley where they're doing these trials. And it is all regenerated. It had been cut into farmland at one stage, so it's all kanuka, and the first sort of cycle of honeysuckles and tafara and those sorts of trees, which are not feed trees basically for birds. But you go in there, and if you go in there an hour before daylight, the moorpork chorus is unbelievable. And the bird life is there. It surprises me because, as I say, it's regenerating bush. It's not, but in the valley, the main valley, there is bird life, but not huge. And my old mate that camps here has picked up moorporks dying on his clearing, and he's taken them to dock, and they've said it's starvation. And I'm thinking, well, there's very few morporks in there compared to, you hear the odd morpork, but you go into this valley where they haven't poisoned, where there's bloody huge amounts of possums, and there's still is heaps more birds. And I don't know, it doesn't add up to me, but I see it. It's like I said to you, go up that mountain where it's been poisoned for 30 years and there's basically no bird life. And there's very low possum numbers. The bird life should have really come back by now, but it hasn't. And yet, in these places like in South Westland, where there's incredible bird life still, there hasn't been any aerial TNA poisoning operations in there. You know, I took some big numbers of possums out of there once I worked out that they just lived around all the fringes. There were big numbers in there around the fringes, but they weren't up on top. But the bird life is the most amazing bird life I've seen in my life. So they do survive together. I don't think the possum, if you've got the right bush, it's beautiful protocarp bush down low, and you know, you've got, you know, all these creeks are full of fuchsia on the sides, and the possums love that fuchsia. But the possum is not, he'll feed on the ground as much as, you know, they love grass, they love all the little bloody weeds and things that grow. You know, that's where I'm catching them. I'm not catching them up the top of trees.
Yeah.
I'm catching them on the ground. And they come out of the bush each night onto the river valleys to eat the grass, eat all that stuff. It's when the berries are there, they'll eat the berries. But the rest of the time they're eating a lot of all that stuff that grows in the river. That's why in there they're living on the fringes. And you'd think they would be living in those nice protocarp ridges, but they're living on the fringes and they eat. And it's the same trapping anywhere. I catch a lot more possums on the fringes, numbers, than I do in the main bush. They will eat berries, they will eat the tops out of trees as well. Pine trees, they love, you know, when the pine, just before the pine pollens, you know, and the shoots are nice, the old posses go, they eat them. And it's the same with the willows when they start budding. The willows, the possums are in the willows, you know, but they eat a lot of grass. They eat a lot of stuff on the ground. You get to nice, even in the native, anywhere, you get to a nice clearing and you put traps around the edge of the clearing, you get a lot of possums. So they're not just tree, they actually eat more food on the ground than they do in trees if they've got that option.
Yeah. And it's all vegetation, whereas now the robin is an insectivore, right?
Yeah,
and
it
so
is.
And same with morkpork.
Yeah.
So kind of suggests it could be something to do with the insect life.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do, and I think.
So you think it could be a secondary poisoning through the insect chain?
I really do.
Yeah, sounds suspicious.
And plus the old morpork is a hunter of mice and rats, and and I actually saw one trying to catch a rabbit once.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, at night.
Morkpork catching a rabbit.
I tried it. I shot the fucking rabbit before the morpork was about to catch it because I was looking for a rabbit for one of these wild food festivals, and I thought, you dumb bugger, I would have loved to see what happened then. The morpork was chasing it backwards and forwards.
Oh yeah.
But I didn't realise. I had to spot in this rabbit go choo, choo, choo. And then I saw the shadow and but by then it was in my sides. But so yeah, I've seen a morpork chase a rabbit. But so
that's a pretty big prey for him.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have got it, but it was really spooking it. It was spooking this rabbit. So No, but that's what I believe. The insecticides are probably having a big effect on those birds. But it's, yeah, I don't know the answers, Andrew. I just think that we're on a downhill slide, which is not as far as our birds and our and everybody doing this predator trapping is thinking that they're helping, but I don't think they are. I think if it was put into it using a fresh, really good bait, the rabbits. Well, I have experimented with that. Have I told you about that? When I was in Big Bay, there were so many stoats. It was unbelievable, and it wasn't adding up to me because I'm thinking I've never seen bird life like this, and I've never seen stoats like this, and so if I brought a deer back and hung it in the meat safe, you trim it up and you throw the scraps out. The stoats were there; they grab it and run away. I thought I'd better do something about this, so there were stoat, those predator boxes around all the huts and the dog huts. So I got a whole heap of them, and I put rabbit livers and some, rabbit legs and some, possum livers and some, possum legs and some, and eggs and some. And I caught, I don't know, I forgot how many stoats I caught, but a lot of stoats. I was catching, half a dozen to a dozen stoats every night. And
Jesus.
and they just love rabbit livers. They eat possum livers pretty well because when I used to poison, they'd burrow in through the pouch, go right in through the intestine, eat the liver, and then back out. That's all they'd eat. And they love rabbit legs. And I never caught, the whole time I did it, I never caught one on an egg. And they don't really like possum legs. I caught a few, but not many. But it was livers and rabbit meat. They love it. And so I come to the conclusion, if you trapped, say, for 10 days and went around every day and replaced it, and so they didn't rot in the trap, you would probably catch more in a year than trapping the whole year and checking once a month.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be educating them the same. So if you trap for 10 days and just left them unset so that they went in and out, because they're very inquisitive. So then that had me, but there was hardly any rats at all I caught down there. And then after I caught those rats around the hut, the rats moved in a month later and started eating my possum lure, and I thought, shit, while I had stoats, I had no rats. So anyway, that really started me thinking differently. That's what started me thinking, wow. Because every stoat I'd always caught, I thought, oh, you bird bloody eating bugger, And then I came up here to do this Karriori forest, and where they have been predator trapping not in Karriori forest, on the boundary and on the mountain above it. And when I got around the boundary, the rats and the mice were just out of control. I could set a trap, go around up these traps, come up down a dead end, come back down 10 minutes later, and there'd be rats and mice jumping off my runners that were coming out to eat my lure. I'd never seen it anywhere before, and this is meant to be an inland island. And I'm thinking, they're exploding, but they're not going in those traps. And that's what really I started. And then I started putting a runner over them, and then I'd be catching rats, and nothing in their box. And I thought, this is not working. These are not working. These are a joke. And that was 15 years ago. Well, that was more. No, it was 15 years ago, 2010. I saw that to start with, and I thought, and since then I've done it a lot, and I see it doesn't work. They're not working. There's a lot of rats here, but they're not going in those boxes.
Yeah. Very interesting.
about. Not, you get a few darks here and you get a few greys up there. And there are places in behind Taumarunui where there's a bigger possum and they're 50-50 darks and greys. But there's still a very nice possum as far as size go. And you get up around Kaitaia and there's a small grey possum. And in Northland along the 90-mile beach there are two different kinds of possum, but there are a grey possum down lower and a better possum up higher. And the farmer up there told me that his father released some possums up there.
Yeah.
After heading south for a hunting trip, they trapped some possums and took them up there and released them.